Dear students, welcome to another session on the Introduction to Biostatistics. We have been dealing with various terms in biostatistics and the method of data representation. In this class, we can discuss the graphical representation of data. Data can be represented in tables and graphs. So, the graphical representation may be the line graphs or frequency graphs. What is meant by line graph? Line graphs are used to represent the changes of something over a period of time. That may be the lifespan or the yield of a crop or anything that occurs in varying time period. But the frequency graph, as we have discussed in the frequency distribution last class, the number of times a particular variable repeats or occurs in an event is represented in the frequency graphs. Frequency graphs are of many types: histogram, frequency polygon, frequency curve, bar diagram, pie chart, or GIFs. We can see what a line graph is and what it is used for. Line graph is also called line chart or line diagram, and it's a type of graph which displays information as a series of data points, and these data points are connected by straight line segments that you can understand when you see the diagram. And the line graph is used to represent the changes of something, that may be anything, as we have discussed a few while ago, the lifespan or yield or the population over a period of time. Line graph consists of a horizontal x-axis and a vertical y-axis. The x-axis represents the independent variable and the y-axis represents the dependent variable. We know what a variable is, but what is meant by independent variable and what is meant by dependent variable? Independent variable is the variable which does not depend on the value of another variable. For example, the natural phenomenon, temperature, humidity, month, year, etc. will not vary according to any other thing in the world. But you can see the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. For example, as the temperature changes, the lifespan may change in some organism. The egg laying capacity may change in some organism. Okay, the life parameters of many organisms are dependent on many climatic factors. So the climatic factors are good examples for independent variable, and the life parameters of organisms are example for dependent variable. Here you can see the lifespan. Lifespan of many organisms are dependent on the temperature. Okay, so the variable whose value depends on the value of an independent variable is called dependent variable. We can see the example for a line diagram here. Population density of earthworms in a locality over a year is represented using a line diagram here. Here in the x-axis you can see the independent variable, that is the time, which does not depend on any other thing in the world. January will be followed by February only. February will be followed by March only after a particular time period. And the March after 31 days, it will be followed by April. Okay, so it is independent on anything. But here you can see 10, 20, 30. In the January month, what was the population? 43. But in the February, it varied to 35. So the population density is dependent on the month or the time period or the season. It is seasonally dependent. So this is dependent variable and this is independent variable. And these data are represented using dots, and two dots are connected using straight line segments. And the next one is frequency graph. Frequency graph is used to represent any frequency distribution. What is meant by a frequency distribution? We have discussed last class. Frequency distribution is a classification of random variable into a number of classes or class intervals. We are not going into detail. You can refer to last class. It indicates the number of times. What is meant by number of times? Number of times means frequency. The times or the number of times a particular event frequents. Frequent means it occurs at times with a particular time period, or at times means continuously. The different classes or representatives of the classes intervals occur in the data. Frequency distributions can be represented by tables or graphs. We have already learned the representation of frequency distribution in the table by the table last class, and now we can study the representation of frequency distribution by a graph. The most common frequency graphs are histograms, frequency polygon, frequency curve, bar diagrams, and ogives. Here you can see the frequency distribution of a particular data in a table. The number of pods per plant means the seed covering per plant. 15 to 17 pods are seen in 5 number of plants, but 18 to 20 pods are seen in 6 plants. 21 to 23 pods are seen in 8 plants. Why is it represented as class intervals instead of class? If it is only 15, there will be some 2 or 3 plants will be here, and we have to represent 16. There will be some 1 plant here, and we have to represent 17. There will be some 1 more plant here. So there will be 3 rows. But since there are only a few number of plants with 15 to 17 number of pods, we can represent it together in order to save the time, space, and for convenience. So data representation will be made simple by abridging or concising so many classes into a group of class. That is what is called class interval. So that pods, number of pods, 15 to 17 pods are seen in 5 number of plants. Here you can see 32 number of pods can be seen in 18 number of plants. That is represented by a line graph. Class interval, it is also called bin or cell. That is the difference between the lower and the upper class limit. The data is arranged into different classes, and the width of such class is called class interval. So what is meant by class interval? You can see class intervals are determined for a data in which the data values are highly spread out. We have discussed a few while ago, it is made into group of classes or values for the convenience of highly spread out data in order to save time and space, so that the frequency of every data value could not be tabulated. That is not needed for such minor frequency. For example, the following is the weight in gram of fruits collected from an orchard. See here, you can see a lot of weights of so many fruits. It is a highly spread out data. So if we are going to make tables for 180, there will be a value, means following weight of the fruits. 180 grams of fruits will be represented by some number of fruits. Then 185 grams will be represented by some number of fruits. So many values will be there. In order to reduce it, we will classify into class intervals. 180 to 219 is grouped as 1, and there is a class interval, and this is represented by 9 number of plants or 9 number of fruits, or 9 fruits are having the weight from 180 to 219 or in between 180 to 219. Similarly, you can see other values. So for convenience, these values are grouped into few weight classes, and this difference is called a class interval. Smallest data is 180 and the highest data value is 340, and the difference is 160. So what is meant by the width? Width of the class interval is, for example, 40, then the number of class interval will be 160 bar 40, that is equal to 4. So where did we get that 40? 180 to 219. So that is the difference, class interval, that is 40. So the width of the class interval is 40. Okay. Then there are 4 class intervals or 4 classes. Then 4 classes into 40, that is 160. So 160 bar 40 is equal to 4, that is the total number of class. And we can see the representation of the data. And there are 2 types of class intervals: inclusive class intervals and exclusive class intervals. Here you can see from the example itself, 180 to 219 is a class. So it is called inclusive class interval because the upper limit of a class, this is the upper limit of this class, and the lower limit of the succeeding class are different. So 180 to 219, then next class is 220 to 259. Okay, so there is no repetition. The upper limit of this class is different from the lower limit of this class. Such class is called inclusive class interval. You will understand better when you see the exclusive class interval. What is meant by exclusive class interval? Upper limit of a class and the lower limit of the succeeding class will be the same. That is called exclusive class intervals. Most common form of pictorial representation of data, that is a histogram, first example. Now we have been discussing various terms coming in frequency graphs. First one is histograms. Graphical representation of simple frequency distribution. We have discussed that. We have already seen the tabular representation of frequency distribution. Now we are going to see the graphical representation of the frequency distribution as a histogram. And histograms uses bars of different heights, and in the x-axis the class interval will be given, and in the y-axis the total value of our study, that is the frequency of particular variable, is given. And we will understand it better in the example. And it looks like the bar diagram, but unlike bar diagram, there is no space in between the vertical bars. In the bar diagram, we can see space in between 2 different bars, but in this histogram, there will be no space in between the vertical bars. So the class interval run continuously. We have seen that 180 to 219. The next class begins from 220, so there will be no space. There are 2 types of histograms: class intervals with equal width and class interval with unequal width. Equal width means in each class there will be same width. In the previous example, we have seen the width as 40. But in the class interval with unequal width, there will be difference in the width. That is used very rarely. Here the examples. Histograms of class intervals with equal width, and we have already discussed that there will be no spaces between 2 bars, and the width of each class is same. But this is an example for the histogram of class interval with unequal width. In this class, the width is large, but in this width is very low. Next frequency chart is bar chart. Bar chart is also called bar graph or bar diagram. In this, as the name indicates, the data are represented by a set of bars of even width. Bars are drawn either horizontally or vertically, but there will be the spacing, and that is equal spacing between the subsequent bars. In vertical bar charts, the x-axis is used to represent the independent variable, as we have discussed in the line diagram, and the y-axis is used to represent the dependent variable. In the bar chart, the value of the dependent variable is obtained or can be understood by the height of the rectangular bar. That's why the bar is used. The height of the bar is representing the dependent variable or the value of the dependent variable according to the changes in the independent variable. Bar charts are also two types, simple bar charts and multiple bar charts. You will understand in the example, simple bar charts are usually used to represent only one dependent variable, but multiple bar charts are used when we have two or more sets of comparable values of dependent variable. See here, simple bar chart showing number of segments in 6 different species of earthworms. There are 6 species of earthworms in these examples, but the number of segments in each earthworm is different. In the first species of earthworm, there are 100 number of segments. In the second species of earthworms, there are around 160, 140 or 155 number of segments. Then in the third species of earthworms, there are around 125 or 130 number of segments. See, the second type of bar chart is a multiple bar chart. It shows two different dependent variables according to each independent variable. In the year 2004, the yield of rice and the yield of wheat are represented here. So since two dependent variables are represented in each independent variable, against each independent variable, we call it multiple bar charts. The last chart you have to study is the pie chart. Pie chart uses the sectors in a circle. So what is meant by sector? In a circle, you can see a lot of sectors like this, and these sectors are used to represent the categories of data. And the arc length of each sector, this is the arc length of each sector, is proportional to the frequency of the data. So from the bar chart, we obtain the value from the height of the bars. Here we obtain the frequency or the value of the dependent variable from the arc length of each sector. So you can see how it is drawn and how the degrees and area of each sector is calculated and represented as a pie chart. The formula to determine the angle of each sector when we draw a pie chart for a frequency table is value of the category or the value of the dependent variable divided by the total or the sum of the value of all dependent variables into 360. So calculate the angle of each sector using this equation and use or draw different sectors, and the area or the arc length of each sector represents the value of the dependent variable. We'll understand from this example. This is the frequency table. Here, the number of adult crustaceans in a particular locality when it was sampled was 6, and the number of insects in that area was 4, number of crustacean larvae 3, insect larvae 2, Cetonax 1. The total number of species was 16. So you can see how this pie diagram was drawn. In order to represent the adult crustacean, we have to draw a sector. So in order to draw a sector, we have to get a particular degree, then only we can draw each sector. So 6 is the value of the dependent variable adult crustaceans, or 6 is the frequency of the adult crustaceans. So 6 divided by the aggregate value is 16. 6 divided by 16 into 360, that is 135 degree. So we will use a protractor and draw 135 degree angle and we will get a sector. Similarly, in the case of insects, 4 is the frequency. 4 divided by total 16 into 300, that is 90 degree. We will take 90 degree and draw a sector, and that sector will be represented by giving the frequency here. This is optional, we can give or we can omit, but the total frequency can be compared using the area or the arc length of the each sector. So pie chart showing proportionate distribution. That means we can understand the proportionate distribution, or we can compare the abundance at a glance using the pie chart. Okay. Then percentage pie chart. In percentage pie chart, each sector represents a percentage of a particular dependent variable. Sectors representing the components are then designated as percentages of the whole total variable. So this is all about the graphical representation of the data. Replay and refresh for a better understanding. Then represent your doubt as comments. Thank you.